says, the greatest enemy for an artist is ease, repeating yourself once you get good at it. To keep his painting from becoming too easy, he sets obstacles for himself. He calls it putting rocks in my shoes. I think problem solving is highly overrated. Problem creation is much more interesting. If you want to react personally, you have to move away from other people's ideas. You have to back yourself into your own corner where no one else's solutions apply and ask yourself to behave as an individual. The giant black and white paintings had been strikingly fresh in the late 1960s. Now he was ready to create another problem for himself, a new challenge. Around 1970, he invited some friends over to pose for a different set of headshots, this time in color. He says there is a big advantage to using photographs. If you paint from life, you have to do more than one sitting. The models gain weight, lose weight, their hair gets long, they cut it off, they're happy, they're sad, they're asleep, or they're awake. But the camera provides the freshness and intimacy of one moment, frozen in time. To keep himself from making the same old colors on his palette, he found a way to mix the color directly on the canvas. Since color photo images are made up of 3 primary hues, red, blue, and yellow, he had the photographs separated into these 3 colors. Then he began to paint. The task was slow and painstaking. It took 14 months to complete one picture because each one was painted 3 times, one color on top of another. In another series, Close made paintings without using brushes. His tools were his fingerprints, sometimes just his thumb rubbed in stamp pad ink. I like using the body as a tool for painting. In a funny way, you usually have to feel through a brush, through a pencil. But there's this object between the body and the surface of the canvas. By using my hands, I can feel just how much ink is on my finger, and then I can feel very clearly how much I'm depositing on the painting. This makes the ink easier to control. Close's next great experiment involved thousands of vibrating dots of color. This time his aim was to find a way that the colors would mix optically in your eye. At 3 or 4 feet, the individual dots of color that make up Lucas 2 are clear. They could be extra large pixels on a color television or computer screen. If you move away from the painting, your eyes will blend the dots. The confetti dots of crimson, green, azure, purple, and white merge into skin, hair, and eyes. With each step back, the painting changes. The starburst of colors sucks you into a swirling vortex. Imagine a spaceship like the Millennium Falcon, accelerating into hyperspace. On the other hand, the painting also seems to radiate out, pulsing with an almost musical beat. Some descriptive words are speed, authority, explosion. If the head could talk, it would shout a command, not a polite request. Do it now, or follow me. The event happened in 1988, just before Christmas. Chuck was on the dais at the mayor's residence in New York City, facing a crowd of people. He was scheduled to give an art award, but felt terrible, with a severe pain in his chest. He pleaded to be first on the program, quickly gave his speech, then staggered across the street to a hospital emergency room. Within a few hours, he was paralyzed from the neck down. At first, the doctors didn't know why. Eventually, they diagnosed a rare spinal artery collapse. Sometimes injuries like this happen to football players during rough games or to people who have been in accidents. Nobody could figure out how it happened to Chuck. But art and medical experts agreed on one point: his career was finished. Close knew better. He was alive, so he would continue to make art. But becoming a conceptual artist, counting on others to execute his ideas, didn't interest him. He yearned to get back to the pleasure of pushing materials around, of getting into paint. The biggest question on his mind was how. I was trapped in a body that didn't work, but somehow I was going to get the paint on canvas. His wife Leslie understood and was determined to find a way. She encouraged him to move to Rusk Institute, a rehabilitation facility. I was there for 7 months. Besides my family and friends, the art world also really turned out for me. At the end of the day, after physical therapy, I'd be lying there, and one visitor after another would appear at the foot of my bed. In the darkened room, their faces loomed up. I realized just how important these disembodied images of heads were. It reconnected me. It was the first time I ever really accepted the fact that I was making portraits. Prior to that, I'd always referred to my paintings as heads. He spent painful months in rehabilitation. Though he'd never worked out in a gym before, he went every day. Eventually, he gained partial use of his arms and legs, but he could walk only a few steps. He'd be dependent on a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And even worse for an artist, he still couldn't move his hands. He labored with weights, strengthening the muscles in his arms. Finally, after many long weeks of struggle, he developed a way to work. Seated in his wheelchair with a brush strapped to his hand, he could put paint on a canvas. His arms took the place of his fingers. Along with the complete change in his life, Close's portraits took on a new dimension. Before the event, he was already painting in a looser, freer style, but now the shapes of each square were like fireworks, bursts of color. It was as if he was celebrating the sheer excitement of being able to paint again. Step close to the canvas and you see hundreds of little abstract paintings, multicolored ovals and gaudy squares, amoebas swimming before your eyes. Move back and the portrait emerges. Perhaps first the mouth comes into focus, then the nose, the eyes, a full face beaming back at you. A major leap, a triumph, a breakthrough, the critics would say. Close would simply say, I was back to work. Today, Chuck Close is one of the most admired and successful artists in the world, with more than 100 solo shows to his credit. In 1998, a major retrospective of his paintings opened at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City and then toured other museums across the country. How has he accomplished this? He says, "If you wait for inspiration, you'll never get anything done. When you look at my paintings, there is no way of knowing which days I was happy or which days I was sad, which days I was up or which days I was down. The important thing is getting into a rhythm and continuing it. It makes for a very positive experience. Every day when I roll out of the studio and look over my shoulder, I say, that's what I did today."